Hello, welcome to Shark Jets. I'm Skidvis. In this video, we're going to take on The Doors, but not the band, not the movie. We're going to cover two different ways to simulate opening doors in Unity for VR. The first way is going to be like Death Horizon. It's just going to be a trigger that opens a door. This can be used in any Unity game that's 3D. You don't need to necessarily use VR. And the second way is going to simulate Arizona Sunshine, which has doors that you can actually grab the door handle and open, and it swings open like a real door does in your house, I assume. So let's go ahead and get into that. But first, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. Let me know that you want me to keep making these. And without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so here we are back in Unity. We are picking up where we left off on our last video. So if you haven't caught up, go back and watch the rest of the series so that you can know what the heck is going on. The first thing we're going to want to do is add the ability to move, right? Because we're going to be doing door stuff, and you really can't get to a door unless you have the ability to move. You can probably teleport to a door, but you'll see why we're going to be breaking our teleport here in a second. So let's go ahead and get started with adding movement. What we're going to want to do is go back to our XR rig, and we're going to add a character controller. So we'll come in here and find that character controller. We'll leave the defaults. Basically, the character controller defines what the character is like dimension-wise, so it's got its height, its radius, and all that. So if you notice, there's this little sphere now inside of the or capsule, basically, inside of the rig, and that's gonna represent our player. So I think I want to move that up. Let me go ahead and just bring him up so that he's not inside the floor. So one should be fine. All right, so now we have the character controller. We also need a script to control this character controller. So let's go into scripts here and add a new script. And we will call this mover. All right, and then we will attach that script to the rig. And then we'll just edit that script. And I will go ahead and make my changes and then explain what I did. All right, let's take it from the top. Like last time, we need these two using statements for Unity and Unity XR. We've created three variables that are private, and the first one is the input device, which is going to be our controller, our joystick, basically. The second one is a character controller, which is going to be called character. And the third one is a vector2, which is going to hold our coordinates as far as where we're moving to, our X and Y coordinates. So those are those three variables. And then in our start method, we're going to go ahead and assign the controller to that variable called device. In our last video, we had you select this from the interface, from the IDE or the GUI basically. But you can also just type it in here. So if you know it's going to be the left hand, you can just type in xrnode.left hand and it will work just as if you assigned it from the editor. The next thing we do is for our character variable, we're getting the character controller, which we put on the rig. So since this is also on the rig, it's going to get that component character controller from the rig and assign it to the variable character. And then all the magic is actually happening as usual in the update method. We have the device again, the controller. We're trying to get a value. And this time we're using common usages primary 2D access. and that's basically going to check for the joystick input on the controller, and then whatever that is, it's going to return a vector2. And so we're going to output that vector2 into the vector2 variable that we created up here. So if you're moving the joystick, or even if you're not, it's going to assign those coordinates to the input axis variable. And then finally, we take the character controller and we call its move method, and we provided a vector3 because you can move in 3 dimensions in a 3D game. So what we're doing is we're creating a new vector3, and we're passing the input axis dot x for the x value. We're passing 0 for the y value because we're not doing any vertical movement. We're going to stay on the ground or wherever we are vertically. And then we're passing the y value into the z axis so that we can move in the z axis. And then we're multiplying that value times time.delta time. That'll give us a smooth movement instead of just like appearing where we're trying to move to. And then this multiplier here of 1f is just our speed. So if you want your character to move faster or slower, you can change this number to a higher number or a lower number to control your speed. Usually that's a variable that you can set somewhere. You can make that public or serialized field, and then just control that as you're moving around so that you can pick a good speed. But one's going to work for us right now. So now that we have that all set up, we can go ahead and see if that works, because I like to test my code in real time. Okay, so here we are. If I move the controller back, we're going back. Forward is forward. Everything seems to be working. There's no rotation yet. We're not going to do that on this episode, but we've got forward and backwards and left and right movement. So we can carry on. All right, so we're going to start off with something that's actually very simple. We're going to go with the Death Horizon style door where you trigger it and it just slides open. So let's go ahead and create our doors. So I'll go ahead and just create another cube. Okay, so we have one door, and I'm gonna go ahead and just rename this. And move it over to the side real quick, and then duplicate it for the other door. Okay, so the Death Horizon door is pretty simple. Basically, they have a trigger, so we'll go ahead and create a trigger. So we'll go ahead and create another 3D cube. And where's that? Oh, it's way too far. I was gonna say it's perfect, but it's not. Let's bring that over here. And let's reduce it in size a little bit, just have it. Cool. All right, so it already has a box collider, which we're gonna need. So we'll go ahead and open that up and set it to is trigger instead of leaving that turned off, because what's going to happen is if you leave that turned off, then you won't actually be able to enter that area. You'll just hit it. So we want it to be a trigger, that way you can actually pass your hand through it. So we've got that set up. We can turn off the mesh renderer if you don't want to see it, which is what you would actually do in real life, but we're going to leave it there just so that we can also see it. All right, so that's set up, and then we can go ahead and work on this door. And the way we're going to do that is by adding another script, and I'm going to call this script trigger. I'm horrible at naming scripts, as you can see. And then we'll assign that to this cube. I'm going to go ahead and add a component and bring in that trigger script. I'm also going to rename this cube to trigger just so that it makes more sense in the hierarchy. And then we can go ahead and open that code up, and we can get rid of all this code in here, of course. And there's a couple of scripts or a couple of methods that we could use. If you have a good IDE, you can type in trigger and you'll see all the different things that we can access as triggers. So we have on trigger enter, which is when something enters that area. Something when on trigger exit is when something leaves that area. And on trigger stay is that you're like literally staying in that spot. So we'll just go with on trigger enter for now. And then I will punch in some code and come back and explain it. Okay, so here we are. I've created a couple of variables here, well, 3 variables. The first one is a serialized field, which means that you'll be able to see it in the interface, but it's not public, so it's private. It is of type transform because we only need the positioning of the door, and it is called the door. So we're going to assign the door that we want to move to this variable. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So we've got our trigger, and now you can see here it says the door and it's expecting a transform. So we will move the Death Horizon door into that field. So now whenever we reference the door in our script, we're actually referencing the transform, the position of the Death Horizon door. The next 2 variables, the next one is a private float and it's called start X. And if you go into our start method here, you'll see that start X is equal to the door's position X. So the reason I'm doing this is so that you can move the door around and always know it's starting X position. So if you look at the door, Death Horizon door here, its X position is 0.505, right? So if I move it, you see that number changes. So we want our code to work. We don't want to hard code it to 0.505, right? So we always want to find the door's leftmost X position, or the door's X position. So that's what we're doing here. We're saying get the door's X position when it starts and assign it to that variable start X, because we're going to need that for the next part. The next thing we have up here is a variable called isOpen, and that's a Boolean, so it's only going to be true or false, and it's private. And so in our update method, well, let's go down real quick to the next section here. We've got 2 methods here. We've got that on trigger enter that I talked about, and we have that on trigger exit. So whenever something enters the space of this little box that we have here, it's going to consider the on trigger enter event. And when it pulls out of that area, it's going to trigger the on trigger exit event. So what's happening here is we're just doing one simple thing. When the trigger is entered, we're setting that isOpen variable to true, right? Because we want the door to open. And then again, when it exits, we set that variable back to false. So in our update method, we're doing a couple checks. We're saying if isOpen is equal to true. So of course, we talked about that last time. This is the same as saying this. It's grayed out because you don't have to do that. You don't have to type that. If you want to do that for readability, you can, but it's unnecessary. So we'll just say if isOpen is true, and this double and says and, so these 2 statements have to be true on either side here. So if isOpen is equal to true and the position of the door's X is less than our start X, where it started, plus 1, right? So if you see these lines, Unity measures things in 1 meter, basically. So you see these lines on the floor. This is 1 meter. So, or 1 unit, whatever you want to consider it. So our door just happens to be the same size as this floor grid. So we're saying if the X position is less than 1 width from where it started, then do something. So what we're doing is we're setting the door's position. We're moving the door. So we're adding to it. We're saying the door dot position is plus equal to the door dot right, which is going to move the door to the right, times time dot delta time. And that, as we talked about last time, is just a small number to get the door moving, to make movement smooth instead of instant. So this is just going to multiply it by some really small number to get really smooth movements from left to right. So that's what that one's doing. And then the next one is just doing the opposite of that, right? It's saying if is open is not true. That's what this little exclamation mark in the beginning means. It says not. So you can either do that, or you could say, is not equal to true. Or of course you could do if it is equal to false, right? Those will all work, but it's common shorthand to just put the exclamation mark there in front of a variable to negate it, to make it negative. So if is open is equal to false, I'll just go ahead and type that out just so that it's easier to understand. Equals false, right? So if is open is equal to false, so this section has to equal true, right? Because if it equals false, it's true. If that makes any sense. This block of code is true. So if is open equals false and the door's position dot x is greater than its starting position, right? Because we've opened it, we've slid it to the right. So that x position is going to be greater if the door is open. So then we go ahead and we just subtract door dot right times delta time. So we're doing the opposite that we did up here. And that is pretty simple. I hope this works. I haven't tested this section out, but it should work. So let's go ahead and test it. Okay, so I noticed there was an issue. So before this will work, we need to add a rigid body to the things that we want to enter the trigger area. So for instance, I'm going to put it on the right hand. So I'm just going to come in here, add component, add a rigid body, turn off is gravity so that your hand doesn't fall off, and set is kinematic to true. And that means that you have the ability to move things basically, or it can be affected by collision. So now if we go ahead and start this up, we should actually be able to close the door and open it. Okay, so here we are. I'm going to take the left hand, which does not have the rigid body, and I'm going to push it through this cube. And somehow it is working. Oh, I got too close. All right, so yeah, if I just push this hand in through that cube, you can see that nothing happens. But if I take this hand that has the rigid body, you can see that it is entering the trigger. Now, the reason why the door opened a second ago is because the XR grid itself, or the XR rig, will act as a trigger. So if I move close enough, you'll see that I'm triggering it just by walking in through. And this is kind of what you want if you don't want it to be a key or something like that. You just want a door to automatically open, like in Star Trek or something. So if I walk close enough, this door opens just fine, and if I back away, it closes. But if you want to do it with, like, if you had a key in your hand, you would put a rigid body on the key and tell the trigger to only open for the key instead of just anything, which we're not going to do here. But you can see it just opens. Oh, wait, this is the hand without the key, or without the rigid body. Sorry. This one. Yeah. All right, so as you can see, that's working. A rigid body or your character controller will act as a trigger. And like I said, in code, you can go ahead and specify what you want to actually cause the trigger. So let's take a look at that just briefly. So if we look at this trigger method, you see that there's a parameter that gets passed, and that is what collided with the trigger. So if we wanted to specify that only the right hand would open the door, we can go into, for instance, we can select this right hand and we can add a tag to it. So let's just add a tag and call it just key as an example, just key. All right, so that doesn't actually do it, that just creates that tag. So now I'll go ahead and select the key tag. So now the right hand, that cube that's pretending to be the right hand, has a tag on it called key. So we can go into our code and actually add an if statement here and say if other .gameObject.tag equals key, then we'll make open true. And we'll do the same here. Okay, so now you can see when we enter a trigger, it's going to check what the object is that it collided with. And if the object has a tag that is of type key, or if the tag for the object is key, only then will is open be true. So I can't walk through it anymore. It's gonna require that my hand be the thing that opens and closes the door. And then we're doing the same here. We're only turning it to false if the hand labeled key or tagged key is no longer inside the trigger. So that's how we do that. As you can see, this has this yellow mark underneath it. This is not the best way to do things. So you can actually do something like this. But this is just an example. It's just a tribute. So let's go back in and prove this theory. So here we are, we're back in. My right hand is the only one that can open the door now. So if I walk into this thing, it should not trigger. You can see, it's no longer opening. But if I touch it with the right hand, that acts as the trigger because the right hand has the tag of key. All right, let's move on to the other door. So for the other door, we're going to use the actual XR stuff, not just standard Unity stuff. The Death Horizon door was just using regular Unity stuff that you could use on any game, 2D, 3D, whatever, VR. But we're going to use the XR framework to get the Arizona door working. So what we're going to need to do is on the Arizona door, we're going to need to add a couple things. So we'll add a hinge joint. So we'll come over here to add component, type in hinge, and we will use this hinge joint here. And by default, that adds a rigid body to the door for us. So we can just leave that alone and focus on this hinge joint. Now, if we go look at the door real quick, you can see there's this little tiny arrow up here at the top, and that is our hinge. Now we don't want it to be there. We want to move the hinge to the side of the door, as a door would have. So we want to go ahead and change the axis, which is the direction that the door will pivot. Right now it's set to X, so we'll set X to 0 and set Y to 1. And now you can see that that needle is pointing straight up. So if this door were to pivot right now, it would pivot with the middle of the door being its center. So it would be like a rotating door, basically. We don't want that. We want the pivot center to be here on the edge. So we will take this anchor, which is set to y 0.5. We'll set that to 0 and set the x to negative 0.5. And now if you look at the door, it's actually here on the edge. So that's where we want it. So if we were to move this door, it would open like a real door from side to side. So that's pretty much all we need to set here, but we can also set limits, right? If we try to open this door, it will spin 360 around that edge, and we don't want that. So we set this use limits check mark, and then we'll set the minimum to negative 90 and the maximum to 90. Now that will make sure that the door only goes back 90 degrees and forward 90 degrees. All right, so that should be all we need for that part. And now we'll create a door handle. So I'll just create a nested object inside this door, which will be another cube. I will call this knob. And let's go ahead and resize this to, I don't know, 0.2 and 0.2. Anyways, it doesn't matter what the numbers are. Let's just go ahead and manually adjust it so that it looks more like a doorknob. And then we will move it to the edge of the door. Cool. All right, so then we want to go ahead and attach the two together. So the way we do that is with a fixed joint. So on the doorknob, we will add a fixed joint. Okay, so the fixed joint wants to know what this is attached to. So we'll just drag the Arizona door into this section here. And we can leave everything else the same. So that's basically saying that if this box here moves, it will also move this other object. So we are good to go there. And then last but not least, we want to add a grab interactor just like we did to the sphere. So we will just come over here, type in grab interactor, grab interactable, and add that. And then here we want to change something, this movement type. We're only interested in the velocity. We want the door to move at the speed of our grip. So we'll set that to velocity tracking. And then we are done with this doorknob. Now we'll need to make a change to our rig. So we go back to the rig and go to the hand controller where we have the interactor. Now you don't want to open a door that is 20 miles away, right? So right now the raycast distance is set to 30, so 30 meters or whatever, 30 units. You don't want to be able to open a door that far away, so we'll reduce this number to something more realistic, like 0.5, and that's going to change the line that's coming out of our hand, and it'll determine how close we have to be to pick something up, or to, in this case, open a door. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Okay, so now you can see a difference here between the interactor raycast that's coming out of the right hand and the one that's coming out of the left hand. And like I said, if you're this far away, you don't want to be able to grab the door, and if I do that, it's going to go crazy, right? Because that's too far to go. So you want to be close enough to the door to use the raycast. So you just get close enough like you would in real life, and now you can open the door, and as you can see, it stops at 90 degrees and it goes that way 90 degrees. So this is not as cool as this one, which just slides open and slides closed. And I think this is what most people will do, but here you go. I've taught you 2 ways to open a door in Unity VR. And there you have it, quick and easy, I hope. I've tried to keep this as simple as possible. Of course, there's more you can do. We could have actually made a key and used that on the door. In Death Horizon, they have like a timer so that when you touch the key card to the door, it doesn't immediately open. It kind of waits a few seconds. You could do that. And there's just so much more that we could have done that we don't have time to do. And hopefully we can do in some other video. But this video was long enough and complicated enough as it was. So I'm trying to keep these quick and easy. So let me know in the comments what you'd like to see, and I'll try to work that into the next series, or to the schedule. And also please make sure to hit the like and subscribe button so I know you're enjoying these videos. And until next time, I'm still Gamedev. If you want to join my Discord, you can do that too. Peace out.